my face down there at the bottom. Since you can't see me, I thought you might like to know who's talking with you this afternoon. And Pamela Holbrook will be recording this session. So we appreciate you all joining us for Farmer Stress, Depression, and Suicide, the Unacknowledged Epidemic, which sounds like a very depressing topic. But we're going to try to equip you this afternoon with the tools to not look at this in such a dismal way, but to help the farmers and farm families that you're out with every day. And thank you for taking care of them. As a member of a farm family that comes from Woodford County, Kentucky, I am ever so grateful for cooperative extension, and especially in my background, the 4-H agents that I had growing up. I am a nurse in the College of Nursing here at UK, but I am also working in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment as Kentucky's agriculture nurse. So I appreciate Dr. Palmer appointed me as such, and we're going to try to take a stab at this very increasing problem that we have, not just here, but nationwide. So this afternoon, we're going to try to cover 3 objectives fairly quickly. And that is to identify those leading stressors in agriculture. You're probably more familiar with those than even I am. And to equip you with some simple tools to help you in making referrals or interventions with the farmers and their families. And we're going to do that at the end through a little case story that's real, that will help you set that in a real-time setting. So when we talk about stress, what kind of stress are we really talking about? And there's 3 things about stress that's good for you to know. The first thing, and the kind that really causes the problems we're talking about this afternoon, is distress. And that's where you have pain or suffering that affects the body or a part of your body or even your mind, and I say even your spirit. So distress is when it's so imminent that a state of danger or desperate need appears and you feel like you can't escape from that. So it's anxiety, sorrow, any kind of suffering or trouble that you go through that you just feel like might be insurmountable. On the flip side of it, we have eustress, and that comes from the Latin meaning sweet or good. So a good stress, and we must have stress in order to live. So a little bit of stress is a very good thing. Too much stress is not such a good thing. But eustress is helpful, or it gives one the feeling of fulfillment and anticipation. But what we really need to do about stress is to de-stress, and that is to relax the body and the mind. And this helps stop the feelings of the stress that you're experiencing, whether it's a really good stress or bad stress. So I said stress can be good. It's not always a bad thing. Stress is simply the body's response to changes. So for every action, there's an equal reaction. Do you remember that from Physics 101? So on the positive side of it, the good stress motivates us, and it helps us to feel excited. It even improves our performance. Sometimes eustress keeps us out of trouble. It's the fight or flight mechanism, and you may have heard of that. So it just bulks us up to get ready to meet whatever challenge we're in. But the eustress is within our coping ability, so we can handle that kind of stress. On the other hand, the distress is a negative stress, and it causes us sleepless nights, and our heart rate goes up and it stays there. It can be a short-term thing, or it can be long-term. But whatever it is, we don't feel like we can handle it anymore. We can't cope with it. It feels unpleasant. And it actually decreases our performance. So the more stress, the worse your performance. And it can lead to mental and physical problems, both. Now, if you think about stress on the farm, I always think of these things, because if you do a walk around on a farm, you're probably going to see at least some of these signs. And when you think about it, the farm machinery is big, and we have tractor rollovers, and then we spray the pesticides, and farm animals, gore us and challenge us in different ways. And then we have those four-wheelers and tractors where we have the no rider sign, and hopefully we do know extra riders on those. And I even saw one at the farm machinery show one time on the side of a mixer, and it said, danger, intense separation. And we know that it doesn't care if that's silage or grain or if it's a human being. So all kinds of stresses are out there. So we live in that kind of environment, which is what makes agriculture among the most hazardous industries that we have in the nations. So farmers, we know, are at high risk for both fatal and non-fatal injuries, and that's for all age groups. We also know that even as children, we begin to have noise-induced hearing loss if we're out on the farm and working. There's all kinds of work-related lung diseases, skin diseases, certain cancers, just a lot of things that are going on already in farming. And now we're going to throw this excessive stress into the mix. It does not sound like a good recipe. Life on the farm is not what it used to be. So we know that half of today's farmer also hold an off-farm job. So they're doing at least 2 jobs, and a lot of times I see them doing 3. So just work overload in general is something. Then we have all the computerization, we have the biotechnology, we have all of the GMO things to contend with. Global markets, the latest thing is, what are the steel tariffs going to do to our machinery manufacturer? What's it going to do to the price of that? And just every day we're bombarded with something new. So farmers are always exposed to this multifaceted stress and the pressure. In addition, a lot of farm work is still hard physical labor, even though we have a lot of labor-saving devices. And yes, it's nice to ride in a combine, but if the combine blows a tire, that's a lot of heavy-duty work. At certain periods of time throughout the year, there will be excessively long days because, hey, combines have lights on them. We can run 24/7 now. And cows can calve during the night after night after night. So farmers have to be able to endure all of this. And they can't just say, I'm going to do this today and wait to do this tomorrow. They have to work within the weather conditions and the government changes and even family pressures. The family pressures are particularly important for the young farmers who, they have kids. They want to do things with their kids and be present for them at their soccer matches and all. So a lot of things going on out there, which may be the reason that farmers have the highest suicide rate of any occupation. And this is what's really hitting the news right now. Even today, there was another news release on national news about the suicide rate of farming. So we've known this from an epidemiology standpoint for many, many years. But now, all of a sudden, it's a hot topic. And the release that came out from that national database show that farmers have 84.5 suicides per 100,000 people in farming, fishing, and forestry. Now, those 3 groups are always thrown in together, but by and large, it's the farming that really drives that suicide rate, not the other 2 so much. During the natural disasters that occurred in the Midwest area back in the 80s, the rate was about half of that. So now it's even worse than it was during natural disasters. And we do know that every year there's a certain amount of natural disasters. Last year it was droughts, floods, and wildfires. So, all of that's going on now, depending on where you live. And then there was a study done by one of my colleagues, Dr. Steve Browning, who reviewed death certificates for Kentucky and I think North and South Carolina. And for those years in the 90s, which was a comparatively good time market-wise for farmers. But among those older farmers, they had at least a double the risk of the general white male population in those states for suicide. And that increased exponentially with age. So we know this goes on, but we've done very little research about what really drives this suicide or drives the depression, but we know it's a global phenomenon. So if we look at this is a J curve, or what we call an epidemic curve. So it's the epidemic no one talks about. And this is from Dr. Browning's study that I talked about in the previous slide. And you can see over at the younger age group, this dark purple line down here is the total white male population in those states that passed away from suicide. And these are the farmers. So this J or this fishhook curve. So the younger ones, excessive risk for suicide. And then as they begin to acclimate to farming, those that remain in farming get along pretty well until about age 65 or so, and then this sharp widening curve right here. This is what I call, if I can't farm, I'd rather die than not farm. And so these older ones that can no longer do the work are more likely to take that permanent solution to a temporary problem by committing suicide. And most of the suicides, of course, are by firearm because there's such ready access to that among our rural populations. Now, I was concerned about this, so I contacted the people over at the Kentucky Injury Prevention Research Center who reviewed the death certificates by occupation. And they had some very alarming data to share with me. So between 2010 and 2016, but really this is just 4 years because they didn't collect occupational data for 2 years of that. They had reviewed these death certificates, and we had 100 documented farmer suicides. We do know there's more than that because in a lot of these communities, suicide holds such a stigma that unless it's quite blatant, some of those get recoded as unintentional death, an accident, but we know that that's really not true. There's more than this. And the highest numbers of those were here in the Bluegrass area, which is a, pretty wealthy area, and the South Central region. Again, a fairly wealthy farming community area. So we're not sure what's going on. Why would it be in these two areas? And all but 2 of those deaths were males. So that's not much surprise there. But over the years that I've conducted all my research and projects, I've done this now for 26 years, I hear over and over again, I can't imagine not farming. I'd rather die than not farm. Because your whole being is wrapped up with being a farmer, being one with the land. I've had people tell me that farming is therapeutic for me. Well, if it's therapeutic, why are people killing themselves? It's an interesting question. So we look at things with farmers, and I've done a lot of focus groups and a lot of survey research on what is it about this farm work? What does it mean to people? And for most, it means to carry on a family tradition. Many of our farms in Kentucky are century farms. And even if they are not, it only takes 2 generations to put your roots down pretty good in that dirt, because I'm a second generation farm family member. So I understand what it is to carry on the family tradition, to be a part of that land, and that this becomes your self-identity. Many people have their career become their self-identity. This is really not a good thing if it's overdone. You need to be more than just the work you perform. But for farmers, this is what they said to me. I did a study in Kentucky and South Carolina, but primarily in Kentucky with farmers age 50 and over. And in one of the items, I asked them how they would best define good health. And there are a lot of really good, well-accepted definitions out there, and we put those as the choices. And then I threw in health as the ability to work. And as you can see, that was the leading definition that our farm couples, these were both men and women, farm households that we enrolled, but they all said it's the ability to work. And as they got older, the ability to work really even defined their health even more. So if they can do simple tasks, everyone wants to be a good society member. We all want to contribute something. And so it became more and more important to them, much more so than not having disease or not having to take medications. So there are a lot of things that increase our stress other than just external things. Some of it is within our own bodies. We do know that if you have hearing loss, that it automatically increases your stress. If you have fatigue, your stress is automatically increased. But with both of those things, if you have stress, you're more likely to have hearing loss and you're more likely to have fatigue. So that arrow runs in both directions. The scary thing, I think, for most people is when we start talking about cardiovascular disease. And increased prolonged stress causes cardiovascular disease. And the first indicator we see of that is hypertension or high blood pressure. And in the health screenings that I do, I see more and more young people in farming with hypertension. And you can't tell that just by looking at a person. But when you put that blood pressure cuff on there and you check it, it's just astounding how many of even our teenagers have stage 2 hypertension now. The other thing that causes stress is dehydration. We live in a southern state. It is hot out there today, and it's going to be hotter. So even being dehydrated will cause that transient stress that we have. But it's the prolonged stress that's the killer, truly, because stress causes the body to produce several different hormones or chemicals, but the primary one that we're concerned about today is cortisol. And you might have heard of cortisol. You can actually measure that just by taking a little swab with a Q-tip inside your mouth. So it's found in the saliva, it's found in your blood, it's found everywhere. But over time, cortisol will damage the interior of the blood vessels, because blood vessels are just like little garden hoses. And so it coats the inside of those and starts building things up. They used to call this hardening of the arteries, but it causes a plaque, and that's the basis for the hypertension, because as the smaller the lumen gets, or the opening gets in that blood vessel, the more pressure it takes to pump that blood through. Cortisol also deposits in the brain, and there's an increasing amount of research that shows us that cortisol probably has a role in dementia and other neurological conditions, Alzheimer's, and maybe even in MS and Parkinson's. So the bottom line is this excessive cortisol secretion does more harm than it does good. So we need to get that under control. So this little schematic here, one of the morning webinar participants said he really liked this. It made it so easy for him to see. So stress produces cortisol. We know that. And cortisol is a good thing in small doses. Everything in moderation is what my mother taught me. It can help us get energy, increases our memory, decreases our pain, gets us out of tight situations. And that's great if you can relax and return to normal levels. But if you don't relax, the cortisol stays up over time, and that's when things start happening. So it even causes immunosuppression, which means that you're more likely to get sick of other things, like flu, for example. But over time, it causes the really bad stuff, even diabetes, and inflammatory responses in your body, and even increases the abdominal fat. So when you see people with what we used to call middle-age spread, that's probably middle-aged stress that's just been turned into fat. It's called metabolic syndrome, and it's a very, very bad indicator of things to come in your lifetime. But nobody really talked to farmers about stress, and I was interested to see what they had to say, because I've learned that if you listen to people, they'll generally tell you what's wrong with them and what the cause of their problem is. And they'll do that even in a clinical practice if you listen long enough. So I did 3 focus groups, just 34 people, but I included farmers, their family members. We had a lot of ag service people, including some extension agents, Southern States representatives, bank loan officers, and rural faith community nurses. This latter group are usually volunteer nurses that serve in their churches, and it's amazing to me, number one, there's a growing number of them, but also they really seem to have the trust of people that are in their congregation, so people will talk to them. So overall, there was a really strong agreement among everyone that we need some kind of a systematic approach to identify the stress factors and to develop farmer-friendly interventions. We're working on that now. We also need to equip professionals like you folks who interact with farmers with evidence-based programs that they can use in their farm community. We're trying to get some grant money for that. So far, we have not been successful, but we will persevere. I was fortunate enough to do one of my focus groups at the National Agribility Training, so I drew in people from all over the U.S., and basically I was amazed at how many people came. This was an evening thing. We had no dinner. We had no incentive for them to come, but they were all hungry to share information with each other and to learn more. But primarily, the group was from Kentucky. We had mostly females in this, and actually that's not very astonishing because a lot of the service people were females. And experience in their job, whatever their current job was about 15 years. We only had one person who really had limited experience with farmers, but then that was countered with somebody who was 42 years of experience. And I know one gentleman who actually didn't sign in there, probably had more like 80 years of experience. About a third of them currently farm themselves, and the others were service providers or other providers who had some other type of farm exposure. But here's the thing, because people think of farming and suicide as being isolated events. 15 of those 34 knew at least one farmer who had either attempted or completed suicide. And that was really telling as to how severe this epidemic is. So what did they tell us? The group collectively said that the farmers just feel beaten down. And the scary thing is, in the farm community, there is community disintegration. there is trust disintegration. So the glue that has held farming together over all these years, neighbor helping neighbor and coming to each other's aid, is maybe no longer as true as we wish it was. And then the last thing was a farmer feels a loss of control. They feel like they can't do anything right and they can't please anyone. You know, if we have one thing go wrong in our food chain, like the lettuce thing that we had recently, people are out to get farmers, it seems like. And that's what the farmers say. Everyone's out to get us. Safest food supply in the world, but you mess up one time and there's a public outcry. So this is kind of what they're up against. So this thing with depression or with suicide, is it really a stigma or is it a denial? Because the farmers don't want to admit this is going on. One of our webinar participants this morning called me and he said he had talked to a farmer afterwards and he talked about the suicide thing and the farmer just shrugged and said, oh, that's nothing. But then when he talked about suicide among, kids on farms, then he perked up. So farmers still kind of deny this is going on. But if a heart attack kills a farmer, farmers go out and they get their blood pressure checked at Kroger or Walmart or whatever at least. But when a suicide occurs, you don't see farmers checking on their mental health. They don't seek out mental screening. And farmers aren't going to talk to other people. They're tight-lipped, is what the focus groups said to us. So overall, society has a changing expectations of agriculture. That's stress within itself. The farm community is not what it used to be. It's increasingly isolated, and it's insular, and it's like they're hunkered down trying to get through things that they can't deal with. And the generational issues among farmers now just is huge for the stress, particularly as the older farmers are trying to get out. There's no one to take over the farm, and the younger farmers have families and children, and they want to be there with their children like other occupations could be there. And again, they're not going to talk about their personal issues. So I looked at this and asked the focus group people, and I said, let's use what we call the socio-ecologic model, where you look at different layers in society or in the world, and you can kind of build on this model and see how so many things are affecting people. If this was a pool, think of dropping the pebble in the middle and the ripple effect that takes place. So from the farmer's perspective, they are risk takers. They take out loans every year and hope they make enough money to pay the loan back, which we know this year's probably not going to happen. They have this exceptional work ethic, and they have this whole thing about internalizing their anger or just denying if they have problems. But they also have a lot of faith. So farmers they're complex people, really. And if we look a little bit past the farmer, we also see there's interpersonal things, these intergenerational issues, total lack of time because you just run out of clock. It's not that you can't time manage, it's just that there's not enough hours in a day, literally, because there are things that they can't let go. And then children are still leaving the farm, so it's a matter of land succession, in decreased sense of family, no longer the extended families that we used to see. And again, these young farmers with so many pressures. So lots going on within families and persons. But if we look at farming itself, what they tell us is there's lots of things going on, but new farmers are really not welcome. It's a closed group. It's a hard place to crack into. It also costs a lot more than it used to, and they have to diversify or having changing commodities. Remember back when tobacco went out in Kentucky and we switched over to something else, and in my area, everybody went to cow and calf operations or they went to hay. And we saw an astronomical increase in injuries among those who went cow and calf operations, for sure. But all of this is a lot of stress. There's the labor force. A lot of those left back in 2008 and 2009 during our Great Depression. There's not as many farms as there used to be, so there's pressure on the farmer to produce even more. And then the other thing, and I didn't realize this until recently, is the farm insurance. You can't get insurance on a lot of the crops that you grow. So if you get wiped out and you can't get insurance in the first place, you're done for. It's a bad thing. And an increase in number of programs that they have to comply with, like water quality programs and things like that. I'm not saying those are bad things, but they add to the stack of stressors that farmers are having to deal with. All of this is doable, but you can't, if you look at everything as a whole thing, it's very overwhelming. So you have to break that down into pieces for them. In the farm community itself, farmers are beginning to say it's a dog-eat-dog world. And for example, if you're a grain operator and you've depended on leased land adjacent to your property and you've had that leased land for 20 years, and all of a sudden another farmer comes in and outbids you on that land and you lose that adjacent acreage, what are you going to do? So there's not the gentleman's agreements that there used to be, like, oh, he's rented that land for 20 years, I'm not going to go in and try to outbid him. That's not the case anymore. There's also less and less places that farmers gather for socialization. In our community, it's McDonald's, and lo and behold, they shut the McDonald's down for 2 months for a remodel job, and I don't know where the farmers went, but they probably weren't happy. Some of them migrated to Dairy Queen, but there's less places like that in our local communities. And there's increased encroachment of suburbs, and people who come in and they build the houses, and they don't like the smells that the cow manure gives off when you spread it in the field or whatever. So friction goes on like that. And again, that increasing isolation that farmers feel. In our area, we're switching a lot to grain, and it used to be beef cattle, and they pulled all the fences out, and now the grain and the corn is planted right up to the house, just like it is in Iowa. And I was looking at it, and I thought I would feel very isolated if I was back there in the middle of a cornfield and that's all I saw around me. I would feel extremely isolated. So you think that's not much, but it is. It's an adjustment of a lifestyle. So all of these things add up. And then there really is no place to go to get any kind of mental counseling in most communities. There's not a building to go to. There's not a clinic to go to. And even if you could, who wants to be seen there? There's this continued stigma of mental health. So we have to figure out new ways to get people talking about this topic. And we're not equipping you today to be counselors or therapists. There's the disclaimer there. What we are hoping to equip you with is some tools so you can at least have introductory conversations and make it permissible for people to bring the topic up. And finally, if we look at the societal level, there's all this negativity in the world, and particularly in our nation now, about farmers, how they treat their animals so bad. And I even heard one the other day about how the carrots were hurting and crying out. I don't know quite what to make of that one. But there's always somebody that's ready to pounce on a farmer, it seems like. So many changing regulations. Like I mentioned, the tariff rule, and the farm bill isn't even passed yet. So farmers don't even know what they're looking at. Hopefully they'll get a vote, I think, on Friday. Market volatility, the poor dairy farmers are taking a beating. And I've looked over the past 5 years, and finally last month, I think it went up about 2 cents a hundredweight on the milk or something. But they have larger and larger herds, and the herds still have to be taken care of, but yet the product doesn't bring as much. So they are in a hard spot right now. And of course, we don't even have to talk about the weather. We all know what that does to farmers. And then still this societal romantic concept of agriculture, it's not Little House on the Prairie. It never was. So people think farmers have it easy, and that's far from true. So doomsday aside, let's do something about this now. So the focus groups, I asked them if they had all the resources, first of all, I asked them what resources are available in their communities. And then if they had all the resources in the world, how would they address this problem? So first of all, some communities were fortunate enough to have hotlines in their areas. Now, we used to have hotlines back in the 80s. The federal government funded those for farmers to call in and just vent and talk. And as soon as the crisis went away, so did the hotlines. So very few states have those now. I called 211, which is supposed to be a statewide hotline, this morning for depression and things like that. But I got United Way, and they could help me with housing, but really not with depression. So I called the National Suicide Hotline and had to go through a keypad thing for quite a while, and then they played me music. And so that wasn't really helpful either. So when we think about just handing out numbers to people, check those out before you give the number to the people, because it might not be what you think it is. But we do have some good extension tools on mental health, and I'll share those a little bit more with you. Several states have already done this in the past when they had previous crises, so they've kind of resurrected those tools and made them available for now. The use of peer support. If you are a peer to the farmers because they depend on you, you depend on them. You are a peer, even though you might not actively farm. So just being there to lend a shoulder, lend a helping hand. And then I would really encourage you to think about in your county to start your own resource listing. And I would start with what's available in your county and talk to the people. Maybe it's the clergyman's group, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you do have a mental health facility or at least a healthcare facility. Talk to them about this issue and make them aware of it, first of all, and then ask them what services they can provide and how that the farmers can best reach you. I would encourage you to put those on a paper listing, laminate it, leave it with your office staff, because they're going to be the ones a lot of times that field these calls, and carry them with you. And then some people are actually doing health screenings at places where farmers gather, like at the stockyards. Although less and less of them gather at the stockyards, they go to online auctions. But think about your own community and how you can do this. So the term I'm using is farm stress literacy. We as support people for farmers and the farmers themselves need to understand, be educated about this whole issue of farm stress. We need a lot more people trained to just socialize and hang out with farmers. Just listen to them and be there, again, to lend that helping hand, or at least a listening ear. That helps more than anybody would even realize. And then erase the stigma of this whole issue of stress, depression, and even suicide by starting to talk about it. We avoid these topics. We just, like the farmer this morning who just shrugged and acted like suicide didn't exist. We can't do that anymore. We have to bring it into the conversation. And I thought this was a really good idea that our focus group people had. They said use motivational speakers at meetings attended by farmers. Motivational speaking turns the temperature dial down about the whole issue of stress. And you can bring humor and stories into things. It allows people to relax a little bit, decrease that cortisol level, and be able to at least take the information in and do something with it. And try to partner. Collaborative efforts work so much more than just trying to do this, each one of us individually. So if you can get the Farm Bureau, Southern States, maybe your local health department on board, and deliver some messages. Maybe it's via a billboard in your county, where it just says, manage your stress less, eat out more, or something like that. You can come up with your own little slogans. Any little short bursts like that actually do get into our brains. I prefer the kind on the back of 18-wheelers, because if there's a Big Mac on there, I'm going to the next McDonald's. So the power of these things is amazing, even though I know I'm being taken down that road. So we can also think of people out of the box that maybe you haven't thought about before. Of course, extension is a no-brainer, but people like veterinarians, when the cattle get sick and the vets are brought in, they are going to hear these stories, and they need to know how to have these conversations and make referrals too. Mail carriers, if the mail starts stacking up, if the grass isn't mowed, the fence is falling down, maybe they need to contact somebody about that particular situation, have them check into it. Sharing messages in groups with couples and not just with the farmer. This is a family situation. Stress affects everyone, even down to the children. So we have to deal with this in a family type situation. If you're in a position where you have a 4-H agent, FCS agent, an ag agent, all three of you need to be working together on this. Power in numbers. And then the location for these discussions, commodity groups can, meetings, Farm Bureau meetings, stick it in there a little bit wherever you can. So some of the possible interventions that they came up with, that they had unlimited resources, was to help grow health professionals that understand farmers. And that's my job. I've been doing that for a long time. And there are several of us now that have specialization in farm health and safety issues as healthcare providers. And then if we dream a little dream, we'll get a respite program going that allows farmers to take vacations like they have in Europe, and we're a one-stop shop where they could go for all their services. But we don't have any of that yet. What we do have is we can involve local things like schools and churches and in our local communities. The big takeaway message for them was, though, always refer to any stress intervention as stress reduction, not suicide prevention. we have to get to the point of what's causing the suicides in the first place. So if we can address the stress, we can ease our way into that discussion about suicide. So how do you know people will have too much stress? A couple of the people this morning called me and said, I identified with at least 3 of those things you had on that slide. We all can, because this is a very stressful world. It's almost a normal for us anymore, and that's really a bad thing. We have to learn to manage our own stress too. So if you're extra tired every morning and just can't seem to get out of bed, you have too much stress. If you're snappy or irritable, particularly people you usually get along with, you have too much stress. Maybe you're eating all the time or not eating anything. That's stress. If you can't focus on things or you can't remember things, if you make big deals out of little things, or you start saying to yourself or to other people, I can't keep this up anymore, or I'm too old for this, it's probably stress. Remember what I said, if you listen long enough, they'll tell you what's wrong. A physician told me that before I went into nursing. He was right. So you have to confirm what you're hearing and what you're seeing. So if you're with a farmer and they're just really haggard and everything, it's okay to say, you look really tired today. What's up? And maybe that person will tell you what it is, and maybe they'll just say, oh, I just had a bad day. But you're giving them permission with your conversations that it's safe to open up to you. Again, you're not therapists or counselors, but you sure can be a supportive friend. And maybe some of the ways to do that is they begin to open up to help them prioritize concerns. Break things down into little pieces instead of 500 things they have to do. Help with planning the task. People sometimes just need to be reoriented to, you have to do this today, but that can wait until tomorrow, or get some help with that. A lot of it right now is going to be financial pressure, so there's not anything wrong with saying, maybe I can help set you up with farm credit and let's go see your loan officer, because there's things they can do and they want to help. There are handouts or websites that you can use, and I'll present those later on, and then they'll be on the website later on that you can access to get all this presentation anyway. But maybe it's time to diversify. My retirement plan is tied up in the stock market, and my people always told me to diversify. So that's what I did. But so many of our farms have no diversity. So if you're a dairy farm and things go bad, you're in a bad way. So if they can diversify, maybe it's time to encourage and help plan that a little bit. And then if you have to, an actual referral to a health provider to help, or a trusted friend or clergy to help get them some help that they need. Serious hints of serious consequences, though. Pay very close attention to these last lines that people share with you. And a lot of times they are the last line that you'll hear as you're leaving, because people tend to open up. Like when you take a trip on a plane, you might not talk to the person next to you the whole time that you're making that flight, but what happens when you're getting ready to touch down and get your baggage? Oh, are you coming home or are you leaving? What do you do for your living? It's like it's a safe time then. So a lot of times people will say last lines, but also use all your senses. If the farm appears more run down than usual, if the farmer just really seems fatigued, and this is what our providers said, they said we could tell just by looking, they're just so very tired. Animals are not cared for or maybe even abused. You can just tell by looking that something's not right. As Dolly Parton said, use everything God gave you and enhance it if necessary. So listen, listen, listen. So a few more hints that go on with people. If they start giving things away, especially sentimental objects like the tractor that Granddad had that they've restored and things like that in multiple ways, something may be going on in the back of their minds. Or if all of a sudden they're unusually happy and they're not on drugs and they've been down, it probably means they've made a plan and they've settled on it. Maybe that plan's a good plan. Maybe that plan's to go out behind the barn with a shotgun. You have to pay attention to these hints. So my suggestion is we include a mental health assessment in everything that we do. And I hear the collective gasp. What I mean is you pay attention to these things. You don't sit down there and do a checklist with everybody. but you say, okay, I'm going to be aware of these surroundings, and is anything pointing me in the direction that maybe this person's getting into trouble with handling stress? And then start that conversation. Give them permission to talk. Make yourself a safe place for them to talk. And you can do that by, start practicing this. We do it with coworkers, but you really have to be mindful when you do this. If you're going to help them, you have to pay attention and focus only on that at that time. You can't say, well, you look really tired, Joe. Tell me how you're feeling, while you're sitting down there working on, collecting seed samples or something. You have to give them your undivided attention. Let them know they are important, because they may not feel very important or worthy at that particular time. Remember, this is a family operation, and stress affects all levels. The little story I'll tell you quickly is that years ago, I had a colleague who worked in the children's hospital here at UK. She told me about a young teenage girl who was admitted to the hospital to the point of death from an eating disorder. She was so thin. And when the therapist finally got the girl to break down and tell her story, she said she had gone to bed, but she was coming down to the kitchen one night, and her mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table. They had the farm books open, and they were crying. And she went back upstairs, and she said, I figured if they had one less mouth to feed, they wouldn't lose the farm. This is how connected we are to the farm. This is the kind of sacrifice that takes place even among our children. We know that suicide is the second leading cause of death for the youth in our entire nation now. And for all ages of children, for every completed suicide, there are 25 attempts that we know of. It's even higher among the youth. 8% of all of our youth in America have attempted suicide. We have no research on how many of those may be farm youth. But if it's this bad for the adults, I can only imagine that it's at least that bad for the children. Children are sponges. They might not know how much the debt is, but they know there's a problem. So what kind of resources do we have? And this is where I really drilled down into this, so maybe you don't have to look everywhere for it. These are what I consider the best that I found. And again, these will be available to you. So we already know that AgriBility is the program that works with farmers with disabilities and their families, and this also includes mental issues now. So we're trying to get our AgriBility staff really ramped up for this, but they're always good people to talk to. So they do have a publication out on stress and communication under their behavioral health. The University of Minnesota is the best website I've found if you want a farmer to go through a computer-assisted learning program about how to manage stress. And maybe the best way to approach that would say it's a stress risk management tool, because we're used to risk management tools on the farm. So this is the one that takes care of us. And then here at UK, we had the Blue to You program that was done several years ago. And I think that's still available on Curves. So you might look that one up. I don't have the actual site there for you. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a National Health Outreach Conference, and North Dakota State had presented there, and they had two really outstanding informational flyers. The FS 1805, which is the letter that you type in to download this, is a flow chart. It actually opens up, and so it's the size of 2 sheets of paper, and it has a flow diagram. If you see this is what you do. So it walks you along how you can help identify and intervene in the problems that you might see. And the other is just an informational brochure on how to work with distressed clients. So the first one is responding to them, and the next one is working with them. So I would really encourage you to download both of those. These are some national resources. Your Life Matters, that's for faith communities. It's a whole curriculum, so if you just Google that, Your Life Matters, that'll pop up for you. Suicide hotlines, again, a little bit of a caution there. Make sure you actually call the number and see what kind of response you're going to get before you hand that out to people. It has phone listings for Kentucky cities, very limited though. So in your region, I would encourage you to find out what the phone listing for the nearest city to you would be, and then call them and tell them what you're doing. I'm going to have this handy with farmers. And that also helps them understand, oh, there's a problem with farmers. I had no idea. So that'll help. Find Help Now is for help with drug use. We don't know what that's like among the farming community, but probably on the increase like it is with everybody else. National Institute for Mental Health has a ton of information, none of it farm specific, and the same with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Organization. So those are federal organizations there. So I tried, okay, what's on YouTube that might be good? So I came up with one from Michigan State that lasts about 3 minutes. It focuses on getting the right mindset and talking positive self-talk and other simple mental strategies. This would be an excellent one to give to your farmers as a resource, because who doesn't use YouTube anymore? And I think it was simple, doesn't cost a thing for them to invest themselves in. So I think this one has real potential. The Farmers on Stress, that one came out last year. I think out of Australia, it focuses more on young farmers and talks about family, about 5 minutes long. It's a pretty good one. But these, if you'll look at these, it helps equip you to understand different perspectives of farmers and different farm communities. The last one is kind of depressing, depression on the farm in New Zealand, and it talks about losing the farm and then leading into the suicide thing. These are resources that I usually give to everybody. Of course, mine is at the top because I like that one the best. So I've had a Facebook page for quite some time. I don't post a lot of things on there, but I will talk about new resources to use for all subjects, health and safety for farm families. And I'll talk about different conferences and what I've learned at those conferences. This started out really as an educational tool for nurses, but very quickly other service providers, and not just health service providers, but service providers in general. And then the farm community wanted it. So it's a Facebook page for everybody now. So we're getting close to 300 likes on it. So you might try that one out. National Agribility is there, but you're probably familiar with that since we have a wonderful agribility program here in Kentucky. AgriSafe actually trains clinicians to deliver, I would say, state-of-the-art care to farmers and their families. So AgriSafe nurses, for example, I'm one of those. We have special training in things that we might see from farm populations, zoonotic diseases, respiratory diseases, things like that, that we know what farmers might present with, and we can pick up on it. Agri-Wellness was started back in the 80s by Dr. Mike Grossman, who is a wonderful clinical psychologist and also a farmer rancher in North Dakota. And it is all things having to do with your emotional well-being. And he still has a newsletter that comes out from that, even though they lost their funding. So it's pretty good. They have a lot of archived information. The National Ag Safety Database, you can just get on that. It's actually housed through one of the NIOSH agricultural centers. I think Colorado has it right now. And you can just type in whatever subject you want and see what you can troll around and find in that. Again, I'll kind of caution you on NIMH and National Suicide Prevention, but it's overwhelming amount of information, so perhaps you'll find something. So we're going to move real quick into this real-life case study with Matt and Susan, who are young farmers. It's purchased 100 acres 4 years ago, so beginning farmers. They're clearing their land, revitalizing it. But Matt's a veteran and served 2 tours overseas, so you can read into that whatever you want. So you came out to their farm to assess some crop issues they're having with their hay crop. And Matt's happy to see you, but he seems very tired. And when Susan joins, Matt snaps at her about something rather insignificant. Awkward. So she looks kind of hurt, and she goes back to the house without saying anything. And as the visit progresses, you notice that Matt just doesn't seem to be as engaged as you thought he would be. Remember what I talked about listening and how to let listening guide your conversation. So when you're walking over the land, Matt says, I don't know. Susan's the one who really wanted to farm, and I want to get her set up right. Ah, well, what about you? You ask. It doesn't really matter about me. I just want it to be easy for her. Last year was a bust, and this year looks even worse. Meaning they didn't make any money, and now they're in debt. So what red flags would be in this conversation, and how would you approach them? For the sake of time, and since all of you are very quiet on this one, we'll go on. So The bold are really the red flags. When Matt says, I want to get her set upright, and you gave him that opening, what about you? It doesn't really matter about me. Oh, major red flags going off there. So right away, you should pick up on he's feeling worthless. He doesn't feel like he can do this anymore. Bear in mind, he's had 2 tours of duty overseas. Could have some PTSD going on. Maybe not, but probably so. So you let it go, but you're thinking about them. So 2 months later, it's a beautiful day, and you decide you're going to drop by the farm because you haven't seen Matt at any of the farm meetings, and that's it. That's a change for him. So you stop out there, and Susan comes out of the barn and looks over. Susan now comes out of the barn and over to your truck as you park, and she's hot. She looks exhausted. And Matt slowly comes out of the house. So he's kind of slumping along. His clothes are all disheveled. And after a glance at him, you look at Susan, and she just shrugs. And she looks so tired. Remember the focus groups. This really feels awkward. Now what do? No, you do not back the truck up and leave. You must intervene. So you could ask Susan if everything's okay. That would be a good thing to do. It gives her an opening, but Matt's coming. You could take the easy road out and just concentrate on checking out that hayfield and just say, okay, I'm not paying any attention to this. If you don't feel equipped to have the conversation, this is what you'd probably do. But now you're equipped because you've been to this webinar, but you know something's going on. Ethically, you cannot leave it like that. And if anything happened, you wouldn't be able to stand yourself later. So let's not do that. You could wait until Matt arrives and ask them both if everything is okay. Well, that's an okay thing. So either one of those other 2, other than just checking out the hayfield, would be okay. But what else could you do? Well, you could start just saying, I hope everything's all right with you, other things like that. But here's the whole situation. Things are really not going well on the farm. You know that the weather hasn't cooperated, and then Matt tells you that most of the hay seed's been washed away twice. With the price of seed, I don't know how they afforded the second time around. So they share with you that they don't believe they can make their next payment, and it's due in 3 months. Neither of them is sleeping, eating, and they don't have any energy. All hallmark signs of too much stress. So you can say, well, tell me more about what's happening out here. At this point in time, you're going to want to get out of the truck, maybe lean up against it and, take a casual stance. I'm open to conversation is what your body says. Or you could also say, you look so tired. How can I help? Again, putting yourself out there. But here's the deal. They're new farmers and they've probably never been through this before. So you can confirm. And this is really good to do. Look, it is a rough year. So you're not telling them, you're not blowing them off. It is a rough year, but it's not worse than some others that I've seen. You've been around for a while. Farming's like that. Let's see what we can come up with to help you through this rough patch. It's going to get better. A rough patch means there's light at the end of the tunnel. You're not the only ones around here that are facing this. They're new. They don't understand this. But now they know that we will get through it together. That sense of community that is so important, even if you're the only community present at that point in time. But again, always be ready to listen and then to offer help or resources. So that's Matt and Susan in your afternoon visit that you made out on the farm. And we're about out of time, so we're going to wrap it up here. I would really encourage you to join me on Facebook. And then I promise you won't get messages from me more than a couple of times a month. If you want to talk with me, that's what they hired me for. I love to talk with any of our agents or farmers or whomever. I live this and breathe this, and I'm from a farm family, so I know how it is. So you can reach me at that email address, although I'm going to be on vacation for a few days. And our whole idea is just to advance ag health and safety. And I do this through the emerging research, the research that I've done and I'm still doing through education and these communication strategies with farmers and organizations around the globe. I do a lot of talks with commodity groups, and with Farm Bureau, particularly with the women in Farm Bureau. And I have never found a farmer that I didn't like. So if I can be of help to any of you, give me an email, or you can ask me a question right now if you want. All right, a quiet group this afternoon, but again, this will be is being recorded, and I think Pam will come online and tell you how you'll be able to access that in the next couple of days. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. We are going to choose which of the webinars from just now and from this morning that we're going to place on the website. And in the next couple of days, there will be a recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation as a PDF document put on the Program and Staff Development website. What I'll do after that is I will email the link to that information to everybody who participated in both webinars.
Okay. Pam, I do have one other thing I want to add. And I assume we're not recording now, right?
I can stop it.
Okay.